Let me ask you something. What do you feel when you look at an old concept car like this? Me, I feel the dreams of the people who made it, and its hope in the ideas for tomorrow. But mostly, I just feel something at all, which isn't the case with most concepts today. There was a time when we romanticized technology, and the concept cars reflected that. They used to be the dream engine for the entire industry, but lately, it just feels like everything is off course. You know what it is? Concept cars are getting crazier than ever, and I'm unsatisfied. Show me an electric self-driving blob, and I just don't care. Show me something actually cool, actually interesting, actually relevant, and I will not believe you when you say it'll get made. All of this begs the question, do concept cars even matter anymore? And what's going to happen to the future of cars if they don't? I don't have the answers, but fortunately, I know some people who do.
My name is Alex Shen.
My name is John Ikeda.
My name is Tom Peters.
My name is Sangyap Lee.
You're about to see interviews with top designers from half a dozen major brands opening up on the state of concept cars today. What's really changed with the business, the creative process, and the logic behind them. You'll hear their honest thoughts on how automakers even make a concept in the first place, how realistic or functional it should be, and why so many are starting to look the same, and what it feels like when people think they screwed it all up. But most of all, I think you'll hear something surprising, a case that concept cars actually matter now more than ever. Skeptical? I get it, but you be the judge.
That's something we never publicly talk about.
Yeah, that's not what I thought.
I'm not so sure if I'm allowed to say that, but
The question comes up a lot. Why do automakers build full-size concept cars anyway? And the surface level answer is easy. To get attention. Views, baby. But underneath that is a swirl of overlapping and conflicting reasons that highlight a more important question. Why do automakers still bother building concept cars today? And to answer that, you have to split things in two. First, there are the concepts you see, ranging from running and driving cars to rolling design bucks to clay models covered in foam and resin. They're made for the public to test new ideas, signal ambitions, and drum up excitement for a company's future. And even now, when there are easier ways to manufacture a moment than dumping 6 or 7 figures into a one-off art project, there's still a belief that nothing beats the real thing.
I guess I always liken it to, you see a great photo of like a bowl of ramen on Instagram or something. It's not as good as actually going there and eating it.
Alex Shen is the chief designer at Calty, Toyota's influential US design studio. He's the man who designed the 2014 FT1 concept car, which basically became the new Toyota Supra, minus a few changes, but we'll get into that.
We really believe that it's important for people to see kind of what our future looks like, in a sense. In the big picture, it's still the industry's crystal ball, if you will. That hasn't changed. I think it's still something that we use to gauge reaction. The only difference now is that, there's the online aspect of it, social media aspect of it. We look at it as a positive in a sense where we could reach more people, especially recently with, technology, and we're able to tell the story a lot more effectively. If it gets great reaction, it makes people happy. It challenges or it inspires designers or engineers, our engineers, because it gets great reaction. I think that's a win for us. The whole goal is to get it on market, get it to the people, and they could feel good about the product.
I think it's on us as designers and automakers to create those objects every once in a while to create that magical effect and keep the enthusiasts coming, so to speak.
Ralph Gilles is the chief design officer for Stellantis, leading design for the company's 14 different brands. That's a lot of cars. He designed the 2003 Chrysler 300C concept that basically rebooted that entire company, and it was under his influence that Dodge and Jeep rolled out banger after banger concept in the 2000s and 2010s.
And concept cars and the best of production cars at the end of the day are a love letter to our enthusiasts, right? Without their enthusiasts, we can go deep down the commodity object route, which is dangerous. So we have to continue kind of preventing, pumping the brakes on the commodity side, which is inevitable when you're doing mass production, millions of units of things.
Every designer we spoke with echoed this point. Concept cars are more than publicity tools. They're essential creative exercises that keep these massive multinational corporations moving in the right direction. Which is why, for every concept you do see, there are far more you don't see and will never see that are arguably more important for developing the cars of tomorrow.
It's amazing how impactful, even internally, these concept cars can be. They may not ever see the light of day, media or public may never see some of these until years in the future, or maybe never at all. But the value they play, and they have far-reaching effect that may not be literal or direct.
Tom Peters is the former head of performance car design for General Motors who retired in 2019. Over his 35-year career at GM, he designed the famous 1986 Corvette Indy concept, the concepts that became the 6th and 7th generation Corvettes, the Pontiac Aztek concept, and together with another one of our subjects, the 2006 Camaro concept that relaunched Chevy's pony car.
There's always been a Corvette going on somewhere within design. Inevitably, there's a buzz that starts to gather around that. It sets up a level of anticipation, and when you do finally see whatever they're working on, it's inevitably and usually inspirational. You're pushing that envelope and creating something as new as possible that is beautiful as well and thought-provoking, inspiring, all those positive elements that you can think of that drives an organization to do fresh, new products that get people excited.
Even in the concept car, Luke always telling me, Sang-Yup, I don't want to have a concept car like maximum speed for 20 miles per hour. We should make a concept car maximum speed like more than 100 miles per hour. So you can really drive and feel and sense every aspect of it.
Sang-Yup Lee is the global head of design for Hyundai and Genesis. A lot of the credit for Hyundai's design renaissance and Genesis's ongoing parade of painfully realistic concept cars goes to him. But before that, his career spanned everything from Bentley to Audi to GM, where, yes, he worked with Tom Peters on that famous Camaro, plus the 2003 Cadillac 16, speaking of dream cars.
For both Genesis and Hyundai, we're making a concept car always seriousness, intuitive to being embedded for future production car.
I could tell you when I was interning in Detroit, there must have been a million shapes and things that were at Tech Center, at General Motors that nobody ever saw. Amazing, amazing designs and things and drawings and stuff.
John Akeda was the former head of design for Acura before moving up to run the entire brand in 2019, where he oversaw the development of the new Integra. And before that, he designed the 2009 Acura ASCC concept, which was intended to be the new NSX before the recession killed the project.
From a value perspective, from an OEM, they want the new ideas. Selfishly, from a designer's perspective, it's a play day. And it's very important for each OEM, let the guys and gals loose a little bit from time to time to just see what they could come up with that's new. I think the new component of it is very valuable. And out of those, you play the Pareto principle, 80 of those is junk ideas. But if you don't do these things, you're not gonna find the 20, right? You're not gonna find the 20 that's like, holy cow, there's something here.
In other words, you need the churn to make cool things happen.
You can't treat car design like fine art. I wish our car design space could be a little more like that, where we could really create objects of pure show off or pure flex, so to speak. We're a business, we have to make something that fits in our factories and sells, in some volume to make it all math out, so to speak. We use concepts to keep from atrophying, if you know what I mean, right? So we have to continue mining those ideas at least, if not actually making them. There's always a handful of ideas that we can take all the way.
There's one more element here. A designer's job is to dream about what could be possible, and an engineer's job is to try and make it happen. Fact is, every car on the road is the result of a delicate dance between the two, and concept cars are the stage where it's all figured out.
When we did the Camaro concept, I remember Bob Lutz saying, your objective is how close can you get to that concept car? How do you package the powertrain? How do you get the performance that's expected out of a Camaro? How do you access luggage? How do you stamp the panels? All that stuff will come into play.
When it comes to performance, we always touch on the function of the surface and forms. I have to say we don't, aero test it, but it's just through experience and knowing airflow. Obviously, it's design engineering. That's what we call it. It's design engineering, but generally we kind of know what will improve it, what won't. Sometimes you get surprised, like the Supra. We were pretty surprised that the drag was almost exactly where the target was based on the first model. So sometimes you get lucky. you know?
Or sometimes somebody, the engineer goes, I figured it out. I remember working on the Gen 3 TL. They were telling me, I just begged them. I said, look, if we're gonna make this car, I need a 235 4517 as the tire. And I was laughed off the face of the map by experienced engineers, and they were saying, yeah, what are you talking about, 17-inch 45 series tires? Are you out of your mind? Built on an Accord platform, John. Took one engineer to say, if I change this $3 knuckle piece on here, we could put those rims on, we could put those wheels on, and we were able to do it. Because of that passion to pursue that by this individual, it helped the car look more like the original concept, right?
Okay, that all makes sense. Concept cars are used to push designers and engineers, test ideas, get attention, gauge reaction, and set direction. No surprises there. But that was also true 20 or 30 years ago, so it doesn't really explain why a lot of people feel like show cars from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s were just more interesting and impactful and varied and joyful. They seem to represent a much wider range of ideas versus today, where there's this convergence happening both stylistically and in terms of the goals they have. So I pressed our designer friends on my theory that because as technology has advanced, the gap between what's possible and what's currently in production has shrunk. I mean, a lot. It used to be you put a TV in a concept car and it just felt like the future, or a wild body that seemed impossible with today's manufacturing techniques. Now, you've got about as much tech as you can fit in a car, and production designs have been freed up with advancements in things like metal stamping and LED lighting. There's just less room to dream.
Back then, concept car is all about dream. But one problem is, okay, it's a great dream, but it's so separate from real world to the production car. So back then, people get really excited by looking at the concept car, but when production car comes out, it has nothing to do with the concept car it's showing. Complete detached. Now the concept car is being more realistic in general. We don't want to create something we call La La Land concept car, which is impossible to make a production car. Even though it's a concept, it's outrageous, we always think in possibility for production.
I think back then, the future, even going back to the 60s and so forth, the future was wide open, right? There's a lot of technology back then that wasn't available at the time. You know, like even a telephone was kind of a wow factor, or a display was a wow factor and so forth. We have to do it with a little bit more finesse now, rather than it's like, hey, check out these fins and rockets and so forth, right? I think that the consumers are a little bit more sophisticated now. They're looking for a little bit more thoughtful content.
Cars used to be the utmost futuristic thing. It's the closest thing to people trying to make almost like a humanoid robot. It's a machine, but it's a, you know, it has soul. For car people like me, you know, there's something there, right? Now there's a lot of other things that represent those kinds of things too. So where does the automobile live in this ecosystem?
And that dance between design and engineering I mentioned, within the pressures of today's market, it's gotten a lot more high stakes. And that's changed the kinds of concepts that actually make it outside a design studio's doors.
They're still multi-millions to build one, and then lots of planning and lots of, depends on, you know, the spec. Obviously, if we have a lot of technology in it, it takes more time, and we have to bring more specialists in. But generally, yeah, it's expensive still.
You know, the brands, again, they pay for the concepts. They're the ones who ask for them, and they typically want them to be as relevant as possible to what they're selling on the road. You know, and that's the battle we have. To be honest, some designers out there in the world are making concepts that further their status as a designer. And then you have the brands that are footing the bill and say, wait a second, how's that going to help me today?
And for those concepts that still get shown publicly, you've probably noticed that many are starting to look alike. Giant wheels, high belt lines, blobby outlines, vertically stacked headlights. Why?
Now, this is just my own personal opinion, right? When I was in school, if I wanted to know what somebody in Italy was doing, or somebody in France was doing, or Germany, I had to go find a magazine that a Japanese print house, publishing house had called Car Styling. They would talk about a particular vehicle at a particular studio, and they would have concept stories and clay model pictures and sketches that they did. Today, because the information is so easy to get, what happens with designers, it's hard to be the only one that saw that and thought it was cool, right? So you got all kinds of people looking at it, and before you know it, there's pieces that are cool on somebody else's sketch and somebody else's ideas and things, and maybe it just kind of melds after a while.
There's only a handful of design schools around the world. And so there's a bit of that natural cross-pollination. But a lot of us have the same constraints, the same fundamental architecture. Yeah, we have four wheels. I get it, but there's a lot of effort beyond that. But there is physics. Like I always talk about airplanes looking similar for a reason. But for cars, we try really hard not that to be the case, where we try to pull ourselves apart. We find some of our older, the vehicle behind me is being emulated by many other automakers, so we're trying to always pivot to keep our own identity. Just like fashion, you see somebody breaks out, creates a really cool piece of fashion, all of a sudden other people are doing it.
I think the big wheels and the tight cabins and the extreme proportions are kind of like runway models to really feature the clothing, if you will. You have to really exaggerate a little bit more just to get people's attention. I think once you exaggerate one thing, you have to exaggerate everything else. If we're making the vehicle larger, wider, and so forth, then everything else has to kind of grow in unison. So that's why the wheels are big.
Another problem is that the two ideas that figure most heavily in today's concept cars, electrification and self-driving tech, are the hardest to communicate on an emotional level. With EVs especially, one of the things we were promised was that a skateboard platform where the battery is under the floor would free up designers to style a huge variety of bodies that could be easily plopped on top. But that hasn't really happened with show cars or road cars. Not yet, at least.
But most of the BEV cars that are out there still look like they're ICE-powered. And some of that is because of the plants that they're built in, or some of it's a chassis or maybe dual-purpose chassis. Some of that we're building on existing platforms for sometimes 10 years, 15 years. And that's just the nature of, a big, heavy industrial complex that we have. Maybe that 5 years from now or 10 years from now when cars are fully electric, you'll start seeing some pretty radical changes.
And when it does, I think there's a bigger problem. Without having to account for the same packaging constraints, the design doesn't invite you to imagine the immense accomplishment it would be to fit it around an internal combustion powertrain. Less friction, less meaning.
It's kind of a double-edged sword. Like, you could draw anything. The bad part is also you could draw anything. It's kind of hard to decide, hey, what's the correct direction? I feel like maybe like the hybrid technology we've done in the past, we kind of veered back to, hey, it should just look like a proper car. And this is what people are used to. And maybe there's a magic ratio, a magic proportion that people are comfortable with and they feel good about.
When you design things that are so new, and it's all about proportions. It's not how a sheet metal is bent this way or the headlight shape is that or this. It's the basic proportions of the vehicle that's gonna justify if people kind of lean into it as something that looks good or not.
Of course, designer wants to do right there, completely outrageous, but at the same time, product does not exist without the customer. We're not at this stage yet. So it's all about progression. Eventually in the future, we'll be doing this, but not at this stage. This is why designer is very important to understand the manufacturing process in details. How can you position yourself to have innovative, but still customer understand? Because everybody's different. You cannot make everybody happy.
You can't make everybody happy, but you can sure make everybody mad. And that is sort of how it feels to have self-driving technology featured in so many concept cars today. You've got two approaches playing out: shouting about it with huge external sensors or disappearing steering wheels, or tucking that tech behind a familiar form and hoping it eases the transition for people.
It's about the depth of the story. It's easy to put, okay, level 5, no steering wheel, and then call it a day. This is not design. This is just imagination. The job of designer is making imagination into reality.
Today, the engineers would love us to just put the sensors right out there at the corners of the car, and some of them are quite sizable. It looks a little goofy, but to be honest, most of the sensors now are getting, again, smaller, easier to package. Some of them can easily go behind fascias now, where in the past they had to be first surface.
There's a lot more things that you could focus on that might not have gotten attention to just improve the whole experience inside, getting into aromas and ceiling lighting and mood, this and that, and things that they don't really think about too much with older show cars maybe, but how a individual experiences themselves inside the car is so important now. It just is.
It's as if the march of progress has both expanded and shrunk the toolkit designers have relied on for decades to make concept cars. But focusing on the interior doesn't just mean silly things like aromatherapy. It can still lead to wild concepts that make it feel like the 90s again, like the 6-wheel Lexus LS van Toyota showed last year at the Tokyo Auto Show.
Isn't luxury about comfort floor in space? Does it need to be in a sedan profile? The reason for the 6 wheels is it creates a better floor entry egress on the back. You know, it doesn't have these gigantic wheels and big, you know, wheelhouse intrusion and all that. So that was purely for interior. I think that's what's kind of very genius about that.
Even if a 6-wheeled minivan isn't your cup of tea, you can appreciate that concept cars, especially public show cars, are always an attempt to define a brand's meaning to a wider and hopefully newer audience. Hyundai makes retro-inflected dreamlike concepts, Genesis makes ones that look incredibly realistic, but both are trying to move the brand forward in very clear ways.
Genesis is a young brand. It's only 11 years with the 8 cars. It's a huge challenge that we put together to able to build a brand in 10 years. We are testing the market with those cars. So GVX Grand Equator, the concept on the New York last year, there was a testing of the frame body opportunity for Genesis, like a G-Wagon Killer, for example. I'm not so sure if I'm allowed to say that, but but you know, we are testing. There is a really strong business case that elevates the brand. We're ready to make a production out of it immediately.
Meanwhile, you can call Hyundai's concepts anything you want, but SsangYup would prefer you don't call them retro future, especially the Envision 74.
A lot of people call it cyberpunk. I'm okay with that.
But not retrofuturism.
Not retrofuturism.
Can I ask why you don't like that term?
Because I don't like the word retro. What makes the past that who we are right now, what we're doing right now, that creates the future. The new is not new. New is a consequence of the past and present together.
Figuring out the right amount of new is a constant struggle in the concept car game. Too familiar, and people don't feel the pull of the future. Too radical, and it's just hard to understand.
Too much new is too much sometimes. If you put nothing but crazy, weird aliens and things, it's hard for an individual to put themselves in the context of that space. But if you have weird aliens and things doing everyday things that you and I do, they're hanging out at a bar and drinking something that looks like a beer, there's something that's relatable to a certain extent, all of a sudden there's this weird feeling of, well, that must be way into the future. You have to have some anchoring, and you anchor with the right things, and then you push, and then all of a sudden it looks super futuristic.
That's hard enough to calculate, but it was a particular challenge faced by Alex, Tom, and John as each designer worked on rebooting iconic models, the Toyota Supra, the Chevy Camaro and Corvette, and the Acura NSX.
If you recall the Corvette Stingray concept, and whenever you interact with public or enthusiasts or media, there's someone inevitably asks the question, why don't you guys just do the split window Corvette? I mean, that's the coolest Corvette ever, and you can't argue. I mean, that's the iconic Corvette, right? And so we just wrapped up the C6. I thought, you know, we had this just fabulous team of designers, engineers, sculptors on hand in this location. And so I thought, well, you know what? We have some extra time here. Let's just take a look. Let's just start sketching some thoughts of what a modern split window might be. I mean, why not? And you know, we noticed 2 things in these sketches. One, that, hey, you know, there might be some possibility here that you could do a modern version. It wouldn't look like a retro rehash of the split window. There are some fresh, incredibly contemporary themes that were coming up.
We kind of looked at every generation of Supra from Mark 1 to 4, and everyone kind of, it's almost like a revolutionary change, right? So the thing that kind of kept it as a Supra was kind of the spirit of what it's supposed to do. And the spirit changed as it kind of, version by version, it changed from, you know, like a Celica Supra to a pure sports car. So, you know, we kind of kept growing that, and, you know, what should it be next? I think some of the main things we thought it had to be an FR. It had to have kind of an inline engine bonnet. We thought the views of the Supra had to at least kind of evoke some kind of a connection to the previous one, right? But not literally like photocopy one from the previous and then making it. We try to avoid that from a Toyota perspective. I think we're always trying to push forward and innovate and try to show people a hint of the future with a little bit of spirit of the past, you know? So that's why you don't see us going backwards too often.
It was an interesting time because the NSX is the NSX, and we knew that this is what it might end up becoming. We knew the engine was amazing, but it was an FR effort. And so from a designer perspective, okay, let's celebrate the FR in proportion. Just be very pure with it because it's a show car, and how it If we are able to continue that program, how it vets out, we'll deal with it then. And as a designer, it's a job to just try to do our best to set it up, if you will. Because that's what a show car is, once again. It's a setup of what's about to come.
We know concepts are a way of shaping and market testing ideas before committing to them. But when the design is a hit and the public goes crazy and an automaker says, screw it, we're gonna put it in production, sometimes that internal rush to figure out how to make it happen is just as valuable to honing a company's operational skills as the design stage is to honing its long-term vision.
Imagine a situation room, so it's exactly what it's like. The engineerings are called in, the CEO calls a meeting. Okay, we got all this response. I'm getting letters from the public about this thing. Let's all cram together, see what's possible. And then, of course, design's the first place they stop to want to see, okay, morph that theme over this package. And then it goes. Sometimes it gets quite far along, and a lot of them do happen. A lot of those kind of low volume cars, I would say the Viper was that way. The Prowler is one of those cars that we showed tongue in cheek, and the Viper, same thing. The Viper was shown tongue in cheek, and we actually made it just because popular demand. People were writing checks for a concept car that didn't exist yet, so we had to scramble it after the fact to say, oh my God, we should actually do this thing. So, and that's when I joined the company. I remember seeing the Viper as a concept as a design student, and just could not believe the company were actually going to make it. And then here we are. So sometimes that's how legacies are born.
Of course, that then brings up what a lot of people think is the worst case scenario, when the production version of a concept feels like a total letdown.
What do you think as a designer when people say, oh man, I like the concept so much better, the production versions? I'm not saying this about the FT1 specifically, but
You can, it's okay.
I
I mean, in some sense, I think as a compliment, it should look better. There's less restraints, on the vehicle. It's kind of like a runway model, it's like the clothing's gonna look better on them. The great part is if you could translate it to production and capture that spirit. So, but there's a lot of other factors, right? It's literally a runway show when we develop a concept car. The Supra, for example, needed to perform well, and what we made probably is too big. Yeah, wheelbase is long, not gonna handle the way it's supposed to handle.
We hear that a bit. People, especially for people that are in the industry, they're not typically understanding how all cars are put together. We get that a little bit, and that's okay. I'm kind of used to it at this point.
It's happened to us. It's happened to a lot of companies where show car's amazing. What does the production look like this? Well, we surpassed the limits of our manufacturing capabilities or being able to. We could always make one. There's been a couple of moments where we've done things at Acura where you had KillJohnNikita.com come out somewhere by somebody, right? But I mean, there were memes made about the Integra, and the way we presented that car and introduced it we didn't do a good job. But at the same time, people were so passionate about Integra. We knew what we were going to get into. NSXs, Integras, these are real emotions that people have towards the vehicle experience that they've owned.
But sometimes there are valuable lessons in there too that help the next concept make it through the process a little more intact.
One of the examples is a Neolune concept a few years ago in New York.
Genesis.
Yeah, Genesis. It's a vision of the flagship SUV EV, obviously. And pretty soon that we are going to launch the production car based upon it. There's so much vision into the concept car. We really believe in the technology. We're like a 95% there, but 5% of testing, we didn't meet it. If we cannot execute it in this production car, then all the knowledge we accumulated, we're gonna use that for future. So a lot of vision study doesn't go through the production at the end of it, a lot of cases, but lessons and learn out of it. Next generation, we're challenging one more time. It's much easier because we have to solve like the last 5%. We don't have to have a first 95% of the study.
Over the course of these interviews, the designers all eventually looped back to one important point: reps. Working on concept cars is how designers learn what works and what doesn't. They need the freedom to develop their own skills beyond the realm of what's actually feasible for production right now. Without the sandbox provided by concept cars, young designers can't build the innate sense for just how far they can push things.
In my case, I started out in an advanced studio. One of my scale models that grew out of that and some sketches, that's what generated the Corvette Indy. So when my first experience in a production studio was doing a concept car. And from a young designer standpoint, I mean, how could you there's not much more freedom that I had. So not only was it inspiring to me as a young designer, but it was also just a total rocket ramp up of a learning curve.
In our studio, we let our young designer explore full concepts right away as they start. People don't realize there's so many elements on a car that requires just experience and knowledge of how to put things together. It's almost like a practice getting into a real production vehicle because there's a lot more involved working with engineers and so forth. Lots of late night meetings with engineering and moving, micromillimeters and so forth. If you're just sketching, we don't get to even a clay model, it's not finished. We're not building parts. We're not seeing the parts in 3D. We're not building backside engineering and stuff like that. So I think it's important. I think it's important to kind of continue that effort for us to keep building better cars because it's just reps.
All of this reminds me of one of my favorite quotes about cars from the French philosopher Roland Barthes. Cars today are almost the exact equivalent of the great Gothic cathedrals, the supreme creation of an era, conceived with passion by unknown artists, and consumed in image, if not in usage, by a whole population, which appropriates them as a purely magical object. The supreme creation of an era. Think about it. If you're watching a movie or a TV show set in the past, more so than the clothes or language, it's the cars that sell the time period. They're a shorthand for an era's ideals, its goals, its technology. They're a collaborative vision of the future conceived in the past that ends up defining the present. That whole convoluted, years-long process just cannot make something that slots into our lives without concepts shaping it every step of the way. What we're experiencing now is actually quite simple. The future is cloudy, especially for car enthusiasts, and we're seeing the auto industry's institutional practices grapple with it in real time. And on the receiving end, it's easy for us to forget that seeing it in real time magnifies every little misstep, dead end, or unsatisfying result in ways that make us question the whole premise. When in reality, that's actually the biggest thing that's changed, not the cars themselves. So yes, you're not wrong to be disappointed in where concept cars are at today. But big picture, I think we have to hold on to hope that the system can still work, because when it does, that magic still shines.
We launched that car at the Busan Auto Show, and there's one journalist about a very influential automotive journalist. His name is Yoon Suk Na. He was sitting in front. I see him crying the whole time when he looked at the car. So after the presentation, I spoke to him, and basically he was telling me, you know what, my father passed a few years ago, and he remembered him with his father to take a look at Pony Coupe concept back in '76 at the show. So that inspired him to become an automotive journalist ever since. And it was not only him, there were a few others. There were tears in their eyes, and they were like extremely excited in an emotional way. But that car was something else. I still have a goosebump whenever I look back at the Busan Auto Show.
That kind of reaction can only come from seeing a concept car in all its unrestrained glory for the very first time. And at a point where everything feels uncertain, that is what the industry needs more of, not less, as we all figure it out together. Big thanks to all the designers and brands that help us make this video. Let us know in the comments what you think of their points, if you still have hope for tomorrow's concept cars, and if there's one from the past that will just always reign supreme for you. This one was a little different than what we normally do, so also tell us if you enjoyed it and want to see more industry interviews filmed this way. We've also got extended versions of some of these chats coming out soon if you want to hear their full unfiltered thoughts, so keep an eye out for those. As always, I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks for watching.